Welcome, everyone, to another Voices with Vervaeke. I'm excited to talk to Ben Holden. Ben reached out to me a while ago, and we met, and we had an off-camera, excellent conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I invited Ben to come on and share his story with us. It's very relevant to awakening from the meaning crisis. So welcome, Ben. Why don't you just, introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about why you reached out to me, how you think your work intersects with my work.
Sure thing, yeah. Well, I think you're an interesting character, John. I think I found you through, I think it's through Zach Stein, and I found Zach Stein through Ian McGilchrist,
Right.
because there's a company, an organization in the UK called Perspectiva,
Yes.
and they've published Ian McGilchrist, The Matter with Things, and they
Yes.
published some of Zach's work. And I guess Zach is a colleague, a friend of yours. I've
Yes.
heard you guys speak. Brilliant stuff. Luminous ideas. I love it. It gets me going. Sparks are firing off, and I come away with ideas and excitement and a sense of possibility. So I love that. Um, for me, my background, I'm a writer, really. I write fantasy. I'm dedicated to it. I've done a bunch of other things as well. I was born into a circus called Snapdragon Circus. Um, that was in the mid 80s. So for the first 4 years of my life was spent traveling around the UK and parts of Europe with this very unusual group of people.
Yeah.
People getting fired out of giant crossbows and tightrope walking across the top of the circus tent and watching my dad get devoured by a dragon every night. And obviously, for a child, you just think that's normal. That's your reality. And yeah, I was fortunate enough to grow up in some unusual places with unusual people, not only the crazy people in the circus, but a kind of working class alternative culture village in the north of England, in the South Pennines, called Hebden Bridge. Um, yeah, and because it's a little bit of a numinous location, it's a beautiful place, and the houses were cheap, so
Uh-huh.
you got loads of artists moving in there, and because artists tend to be a little bit more open-minded, a lot of gay folk moved in, so that all these like lesbians, gay folk, artists, hedge witches and wizards like knocking around, coming around for cups of tea and stuff,
Yeah.
together with the circus, but very working class at the same time. It's quite gentrified now,
Mm.
but at that time it had an unusual mixture of creative vibrancy with the working class really embedded in that. And um, then you figure out the world is not like that. It's not all like a circus and this unusual kind of place that I grew up in. So that was a shock to find it wasn't like that. And so discovering like your work, people like uh, James Hillman, who's a
Uh-huh.
like founder of archetypal psychology, drawing on the work of Jung, but taking it in a new direction. Ian McGilchrist, David Abram, the cultural ecologist, a whole bunch of other people, and that has been kind of a journey of figuring out, piecing together my tradition, or sort of the idea of tradition as a living force, um, because otherwise you just at sea up against it, up against you're being digested in the belly of Moloch, and it's not a pleasant experience. So I felt like, God, I've got to get some sort of soul armor or some defenses and like just some kind of sense of like vibrant community and a community of ideas and a living tradition, which I feel is linked to the mythopoeic tradition. I sometimes imagine it as animistic. None of these are quite right, so I'm still figuring it out. This is the Neoplatonic thing that I feel an allegiance to, um, and just odd, eccentric people that have chosen to live in a way that's true to them.
Yeah.
These are the people that I really feel a connection with. And so partly as a response to trying to do social media in a creative way that does not devour me. I've started this YouTube channel called Fantasy Creates Reality, where I'm trying to have conversations with people in this sort of mycelial college. I like to imagine it as a mycelial college. It's this diffuse underground network of people that fit into these kind of living traditions, and it's still forming. I'm still trying to sense what it actually is, and
Uh-huh.
what my relationship with it is, and also to draw on that and put it into my work as a writer. I should say as well, you know, I've not done a whole lot. I'm sort of a journeyman. I published a book of poems called Vespers. I've written a bunch of short stories. I've written like well over 1 million words of fiction and burned them. That's what you've got to do for
Yep.
practice, you know.
Yep.
So I
Yep.
feel like, you know, I've just now being a father as well, and having been through some stuff, and done the 1 million words and burned them. I feel I'm just about ready to do something decent, you know, that's not just more filler. Like
Mm.
there's something half decent. That's what I hope anyway. We'll find out though.
So do you meet with other people in any regular fashion in this community building, or is it sort of more ad hoc, or um uh
Yeah,
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 absolutely. Meeting in person, that's vital, isn't it? I mean, for these film conversations for the YouTube channel, I try as much as possible to actually travel down to people and meet them and have that face-to-face connection.
oh,
But then where I live in the north of England, there's a whole load of people that are doing unusual things, and you know, there are little mini forest villages in the
mm,
woods. There are there's people into permaculture here. There's a whole lot of gardeners, loads of gardeners here,
yeah,
and often they have a sort of side hustle, artistic practice as well.
yeah,
Um, not to say gardening itself isn't artistic. And then yeah, there are storytellers. There are like academics. A little bit spread out, you know, throughout the British Isles, up in Scotland. I live on not far from the border of Scotland, border of Northumberland,
uh,
um, and yeah, you get little clusters of these people that are spread out all around the British Isles in unusual places, often like edge places where the landscape has a little bit of a numinous quality. You can feel the presence of the land, and that's a sustaining force in some sense.
uh,
And maybe it's cheaper to live,
yeah.
so you can pursue some sort of a creative work. But I've been listening to your conversation with is it Damien Walters? Have I got that
Yes,
right?
yes,
Yeah,
Damien.
yeah, on science fiction and cognitive science. And
Yes.
I thought that was a great conversation. You were getting really into um, these ideas of, I think you brought up that Tolkien essay on fairy stories, and he's
Yep.
talking about
Recovery theory.
recovery
Yeah. Yeah.
theory, and escapism, and talking around questions of, are these stories, fantasy and science fiction, speculative fiction, is it just escapist, or is it not? Is it doing something else? And what
Mm,
is that something else?
mhm.
So that would be really interesting to get into, because I revisited that essay. It's a brilliant essay, Tolkien
Yes. Yeah.
on fairy stories. Um, I would love to talk about that, but does that sound exciting to you, or
Yeah,
what
very
sparked your?
exciting. I enjoyed the conversation with Damien a lot. I hope to talk to him again in the future. Um, yeah, I think that there's a lot that's converging now with me between Tolkien's idea of the recovery theory, the work I'm doing on the imaginal, and the work I'm doing on ritual as the way of enacting an imaginal way of knowing. Um, so yeah, I'd very much like to talk to you about it. Um, I'll quickly review the recovery theory for people who
Okay.
might not have seen. Tolkien is confronted with the fact that many people accuse fantasy literature of being escapist, which is just kind of like analogous to spiritual bypassing, going into an alternative world to escape one's responsibilities or one's problems or one's tribulations and trials. And he doesn't deny that some fantasy literature might be doing that function, but he argues for a different kind of function, and it's analogous to, in many ways, Corbin's distinction between the imaginary and the imaginal. Tolkien argues that going into that other world is like an anthropologist going to another country. The anthropologist wants to do ethnography, so the anthropologist has to learn how to take off the cultural lens he grew up with, the cultural glasses, and become enculturated in the other culture, put on a different set of glasses by which to make sense of the world, different perspectival and participatory knowing. And then when she returns to her home culture, she sees it, but through the eyes, the lens of that other culture. And so she can see into the depth of her own culture in a way she couldn't before. And then she can integrate the judgment from within and the judgment from without. And almost like a stereoscopic vision, she can come to a more profound insight into the depths of her own culture. So it is a way of recovering something, or perhaps a little bit more precisely, recovering the depths of something that was previously so familiar to you, it was practically transparent to you. And Tolkien argues that this, of course, is an incredible gift of fantasy and speculative fiction in general, because very often our lives are beset and undermined by a kind of entrapment at a superficial level that disconnects us from the depths of our experience and our understanding. How is that for a presentation of the theory?
That's great. Let me enrich it with a quote from Tolkien from that essay. So he says, "Why should a man be scorned if, finding himself in prison, he tries to get out and go home?
Yes.
Or if, when he cannot do so, he thinks and talks about other topics than jails and prison walls?"
Yes.
So
Yes.
I really feel that Tolkien has this sense that the way the world is now is nothing like what it could be or what it has been.
Yes.
It is infinitely rich, deep, mysterious,
Yes.
and we've created. I mean, this is what Ian McGilchrist argues really well in The Master and His Emissary and The Matter with Things, that it's sort of the world of the left hemisphere characterized as the high functioning bureaucrat. So we've created a world of the high functioning bureaucrat. And, and growing up in the circus and these unusual villages and places, I feel I've got a heightened sense to that bureaucratic culture of advanced capitalism. And, I don't want to just slag it off one dimensionally, but I really do feel that there's an ugliness about it often.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't encourage me to be aesthetically alive to the beauty of the world, because there's a lot of industrial estates and broken glass on the wall and motorways and roadkill, and not to mention all the species, all the animals that are going extinct, all the interconnected existential crises that you and Schmachtenberger and Zach Stein talk about. To open yourself up to that and the general architectural aesthetic ugliness of day-to-day life, that takes a lot of courage to do. And Tolkien, with that essay, is saying, of course we should escape from this. It's the sane thing to do. It's insane to be blinkered to it and only stay within it, only accept the prison walls and just go, this is it, this is real, this is all we've got. So let's or not even let's, this is all we've got, that this is all there is. Anything outside of this is unreal and an enchantment or something. And Tolkien goes on to say, it may proceed from a considered disgust for so typical a product of the robot age that combines elaboration and ingenuity of means with ugliness. So utility and ugliness. And often an inferiority of result. And and he's talking about these electric lights that are everywhere. That's one of his big concerns, the mechanization of his world back then.
Yeah.
And he's saying, well, people say to him, electric lamps and factories, these are just here to stay. They're what they are. He's saying, no, it's all transitory. It's all transient. We haven't had them in the past. We used to light our homes with firelight and candlelight. And in the future, it might be some kind of bioluminescence in the alcoves and shelves that is a deeper, more pleasing quality of light that evokes certain emotions and thoughts and maybe conversations that would not happen under that sort of harsh fluorescence that you get in a lot of the office blocks. So I love that Tolkien is sort of giving the finger to the ugliness of the modern world and saying we can do better than that, and fantasy can help us do that.
Right.
The imaginal.
Yes, well, we can use the imagination to see into the untapped depths and to see into real possibilities that we're otherwise blinded from seeing. And that's the imagination for the sake of perception, which I take it, which I take it to be sort of one of the core ideas of his theory. I mean, that distinction actually goes back to a distinction that some of the romantics made between fancy and imagination, where the imagination was an enabling of a recovery of a connectedness to the depths of nature and to, as I just mentioned, real possibilities. Is that the role you see your fiction doing? Is that what you want your fiction to do?
Yeah, 100%. I want it to be about ensoulment. I want it to be connected to this project of re-ensouling the world. Or maybe that's wrong, because the world is already deeply ensouled. We just don't always recognize that. So it's waking up to the depths of soul that exist in the world. And I want to make work that does that, but also has some of these ideas embedded in it. I don't want it to be, quixotic, overly romantic. And I mean, the story I'm working on at the moment is set in a city, and a city is, a habitat of technologies.
Yes.
And technologies and the furniture that we live with, the ordinary, familiar, everyday objects of our world. Those should be included in this idea of the numinous. It's not only forests and rivers,
Right.
and mountains and these like enchanted otherworldly lands.
Right.
It's not that, Tolkien says it in that essay. He's talking about the familiar, and I think, drawing on Wordsworth and Coleridge for these ideas. It's like somehow there's something to do with, because of history, a lot of history, we're living behind a windshield. We've got these kind of blinkers on.
Yeah.
And something to do with being over familiar as well.
Yes.
When you take the things around you for granted, and you can't see them with the fresh eyes of a person from another world or another culture, or a child might see them where they're really presencing themselves. They're glowing. You can feel the flame of things in them. And that is when it becomes this numinous experience. Life feels like a gift, and all the stuff that you talk about, John, with a rich sense of meaning and awe and reverence being the virtue of awe. All that stuff, you can't have that unless you're able to clear that gray film away from your eyes somehow. I would like my work to do that, but it takes a whole concerted effort. And one of the things you and Damien were talking about was you can't really do it unless the consumers or readers transform themselves into participants and active agents in the world's becoming. There's something about only receiving things. That's when it becomes almost like you can turn a beautiful work of art into a burger. And it's just, you devour it and get the next one and get the next one.
Yes. Yeah. The aesthetics of the smooth, where we reduce beauty to what is pleasing and most easily consumable by our cognition or our bodies. Yes, I understand what you're talking about. Um, so that brings me something up because you've invoked the term a couple of times, the numinous, and how it's distinct from the aesthetics of the smooth. Um, I can't remember the author's name, which is unfortunate, but the short story, The Universe of Things, she writes about this mechanic, and he has this sort of awakening experience where everything is doing as you says. It's really presencing itself to him. But he experiences it horrifically. He experiences it as overwhelming and oppressive. And I'm thinking of, the classic definition of the numinous by Otto, the mysterium, the fascinating mystery that's also terrifying, that also shakes us to the core. And when you read ancient authors or even Rilke about beauty, beauty is that terror that deigns to just not kill us, and these notions of how awe is one step away, or on the horizon of horror in a very powerful way. Because of course, um, what the familiar does, well, listen to the term family. It makes everything part of your family, part of your home. Then you understand it, and when you lose that, there's an exposure to the wide open that can be quite terrifying. And I'm wondering if part of the reasons for the aesthetic is the smooth, and Taylor goes back to this, is that we've created what he calls the buffered self. We've tried to enclose ourselves with psychologically and psychotechnologically and technologically all these layers that protect us from anything being shocking to us, or radically surprising, or mysterious, or terrifying. Because one of the theses is, as we've lost the ability of the sacred canopy of religion to protect us in that way, we've in the secular world, we've built up these alternatives. The problem with the alternatives is they only get one half of what the sacred used to do. Yes, the sacred did used to home us, but it also used to expose us to the horizon, reverence, awe, wonder, even horror. I mean, you couldn't. God forbids Moses from seeing all of him because it would destroy him. That kind of idea. And so I'm wondering if, 2 points to put to you, and then I'll give you time to respond at length. I think one of the reasons why it's familiarity, but it's also a kind of insulation that is also now becoming a suffocation for people. We've insulated ourselves against the mysterious, and then of course we try to get it in sort of substitute fashions, psychedelics, etc. I'm wondering, therefore, if to challenge, and I think you can hear of Charles Williams, for example, one of the other inklings, if to really get fantasy that challenges the familiar and exposes us to the numinous, we need to come up against the horizon of horror. And I don't mean Hollywood horror, which is just things jumping out of the dark and stabbing you. I mean the kind of horror where you realize how profoundly richer and deeper and dangerous reality is beyond what you conceived. Do you think that needs to be a proper part of fantasy literature, given how numbed we are by all of this layering around us? Did that make sense even as a question?
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. It's really interesting. Yes, I would say, but we can't say it has to be a part, but we should nuance horror. I mean, there's so many different flavors and kinds of horror and darkness, but
Yeah.
definitely, well, it makes me think of um Zach Stein talking about the pre-tragic, the
Yes.
tragic, and the post-tragic, and you
Yes. Yes.
can't really move through in from the pre-tragic into the tragic, or have any glimpse of what post-tragic even means, unless you engage with grief as well as horror and darkness. I mean, grief is something slightly different, but
Yeah.
related to horror. But all the dark things of the world. I mean, nature is terrifyingly destructive and
Yes.
brutal and full of things that will destroy us,
Yes, yes,
wipe
yes.
us out. So it's true. It's honest to engage with that, and to engage with, that there's so much suppressed. What's in my mind now is a book by James Hillman called The Dream and the Underworld, and all the suppressed denizens of the underworld and the inhabitants of Hades. And what does Persephone learn being an inhabitant of that world? And what does Psyche learn from her? Because in the Apuleius tale, Psyche journeys down into the underworld to meet Persephone, and you get something very specific that she can only get from the underworld Persephone, which is a kind of beauty that Aphrodite doesn't have.
Oh,
This is super interesting territory, man. Uh, this is why I'm more drawn to polytheism than monotheism, just because of the richness of, and you could probably summon some, Eastern Orthodox Christianity or something that was more lively, perhaps.
yeah,
But basically, the cavalcade of terrifying creatures and characters that you get down there, and all the nymphs and nixies, and all the creatures of the Fae, and the trolls and goblins that inhabit the imagination of, the British Isles, and many places in the world. And in Japan, they've got their own
yeah,
pantheon of sort of polytheistic creatures, the yokai, kappa, and kitsune, and tengu, all these. And I just find that I mean, I'm smiling, and I've just caught myself there, because sometimes I just get like captured by the spell of them, and what we're talking about is the terror and the horror, and you shouldn't smile too much at these creatures if you really know what they're about,
no,
because they will try and kill you. You could relate them to pathologies, and how
yeah,
pathologies are wiping out so many people in supposedly, happy, developed
yes,
Western cultures.
yes.
So, yeah, I want to say the work that I'm drawn to is work that creates a space for those suppressed, unconscious creatures that people our dreams and our pathologies.
Mm.
I want to. I mean, that's using conceptual language, though, really.
No,
But
I
in
get it.
fantasy, you can give them give them blood and
Yeah,
breath, and scales, and claws, and a kind of inhuman speech that can do terrible things to a person. All these kind of things. I'm very interested in a friendship. There's a book called Feeding Your Demons by I think a Tibetan American woman who based it on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and that's about coming face to face with these things, breathing life into them with imagination and sensate courage.
so you said so many interesting things there. So first of all, what can fantasy literature do by uh, um in bringing us into this confrontation? How can that help us address the meaning crisis? And you mentioned polytheism. This brings up the next question, which is, what's the relationship between uh, fantasy literature and science fiction, and and religion, broadly construed? Because of course, one of the jobs that religion used to do, uh, this is sort of a classic Jungian thesis, is to help give us a framework by which we could confront these things, so that we could bring about an overall increase in the scope of consciousness. We could integrate the conscious and the unconscious mind better, etc., and that would enliven and enrich our understanding of ourselves and our connection to other people in the world. That's sort of the Jungian mythos. And of course, religions did that. Jung famously said, if religions were doing their job, he wouldn't have to do his job, and things like that. So what is the function of fantasy literature? Is it taking over that function from religion, or is it informed by a particular religious vision, or it trying to come up with a new uh, way of orienting to reality, and the sacred or the numinous within reality. What do you feel that you're doing in that area?
Yeah, sure. Well, it can't possibly take over religion. If it tries
Yeah,
to do that, then we're in trouble.
yeah, L. Ron
Um,
Hubbard kind of thing. Yes, yeah,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, things like this. And I wish there were more options for religions, you know.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I'm not inspired by what's on the table generally.
Ah, ah,
Um,
quintessential statement of the meaning crisis. I'm
right,
not
right.
inspired. I just want to savor that. Sorry for interrupting, but I just want to
Okay.
savor that. I'm not inspired by what's on the table. Don't
Yes.
lose your thought, but could your train of thought, but could you just unpack that? That was really juicy. Could you
Well,
just
it's the same. It's the same with the political parties in the
right?
UK
Yeah,
and probably other countries. You know, um, they should. Hillman suggests that all politicians should have to state their depth aesthetics
yes,
policies,
yeah,
and so how would that inform the way we move through the world and experience things like um, public places, courtyard squares.
yeah,
What would service stations look like? You know, this kind of thing. Um, Having imagination and courage and daring and stepping away from the bureaucratic, the emissary and the master and his emissary. That
yeah,
fucking boring, like limited scalpel logic, um, grey speech, bureaucratic mode, which is so entrenched. I can't see it happening. I don't have faith in the political machinery to make this happening. So some unusual, sophisticated move between the edge and the center. That I mean, all you guys are on that one. But Schmaxenberger elucidates it pretty well, doesn't he? And
yeah.
you and Zach Stein have got some great things to say about it. So yeah, daring imagination and a courageous sensuality. This is what Aphrodite gives us, you know, that if you can
Yeah,
imagine your version of or your sense of Aphrodite smiling at you in a sort of dangerous but encouraging way,
yeah.
and that is encouraging courageous sensuality, and that's a political act because that is opening yourself to a whole lot of pain and grief and terror that's present in the world. But if you can do that, and God, I struggle with it all the time, but if you can do it, then then you're then you're open. The gateways are open. Like David Abram talks about sensory perception as the silken thread that binds our separate nervous systems into the encompassing ecosystems, and
Yes.
the way that the everything good about existence, the cosmos, the world, whatever you love, the way that it gets in is through the senses. These gateways are skin
Yeah,
and taste and you know vision, smell. God, we're such visual creatures, you know, me and you now on this little
yeah,
Zoom
yeah.
box. Um, but if we can do that, then imagination starts to get fed. We're more awake to what our own desire might be. And these questions of what's the heart of your desire and where does it meet the needs of the world are political questions that could lead to political action. And who knows, in the future, it might create some more interesting options. So we've got, yeah, some richer meals on the table.
So that was a fantastic answer about the junk food of our current political arena. But you got to that by mentioning that none of the you actually first stated that you're uninspired by what's on offer on the religious table. Is it also the same critique there? It's not challenging. It's not the courageous. It's not the encouraging challenge to the imagination and to a kind of courageous sensuality and pursuit of deeper understanding and connectedness. So,
Yeah.
are the religions also all failing in the same way to offer that?
Well, I'm sure they're failing and succeeding at the same time. But just for me personally, I see I'm put off by all of them, and I'm attracted to certain parts of them simultaneously. Like
Ah, yes.
with Islam, my way into that is Henri Corbin,
Yeah. Yeah,
and
of course.
that's the mysticism. I'm always interested in the more the the mystical side of monotheistic religions that leans more pagan, right?
Right,
And
right.
then with Christianity, um, people say that there's certain branches, Eastern Orthodox and some
Yeah.
others, like Paul Kingsnorth, who was a former writing tutor of mine, and Martin Shaw, who I did the School of Myth and Storytelling with in Dartmoor. They're both great characters, and they've both converted to Eastern Orthodox
Yes.
Christianity, and
A lot of
um,
that's happening a lot.
that's cool. That's good for them. That doesn't really appeal to me. Like a lot of the clothing that the priests wear, there's like drab, and I mean I wear fairly muted colors, but I love it when people dress up and there's a sense of, like in Mexico, the Day of the Dead, like the
Right. Yeah.
vibrancy there, and the priests, they put in helter skelters in some of the churches to make it more sort of snazzy, and but it's like that's not it either.
Yeah.
um and the images, like, or what you're fed in the mainstream of what the image, like our sense of angels, Henri Corbin's sense of angels is much more vibrant and alive and
Yeah.
interesting. The mainstream sense of angels is not like the Christian sort of arrogance that you encounter a lot of the time is our way is the only way, that a lot of the monotheisms have. That puts me off as well. Buddhism is attractive. Shinto is attractive, but then that's going east.
Yeah.
And I like the idea of, it feels like a wise move to be aware that you're bedded in a living
Yeah.
or a confluence of living traditions in your own land and your own culture, um, that is Christian for the last 2,000 years. So you can't ignore that. A lot
Yeah.
of my friends who are, kind of pagan inclined, earth-based spiritualities, um, I I share an affinity with these guys. We gather around the fire at Samhain and do some rituals, but the idea that you could just sort of suddenly become a pagan and ignore the
Yes.
2,000 years of
Yeah.
Christianity is naive, isn't it? So
Yeah.
that needs thinking about. So with all those things considered, I'd like Shinto is a really interesting one, but it just makes me wonder, what could our kind of Shinto be, or
Yeah.
like I want a new animism of the Western civilization, which is inflected by bioregion and locality and
Yes.
the individual character and spirit of place, and that is infused with an imaginative science, the best of, the creative science, not the new atheist, like,
Yeah.
scalpel language crap. Something better than that.
That was wonderful. Yeah, that I mean, and you came very alive there, which was really, um, you're on fire. It was quite wonderful to watch it. Um, yeah, and this is not a criticism that I'm now offering. I just want to share this back. I noticed that, and I think it is extremely telling and pertinent that your critique of the religions was there was twofold, was the lack of vibrancy, aliveness, and you were doing, and then also, right, a lack of rootedness in the depths of history, right, and then tradition, and that the religions on offer are not doing those. We can't just import something from elsewhere, because although it may have the vibrancy, it doesn't have the rootedness. And the problem with the Christianity of today, because it doesn't have the vibrancy, its connection to the tradition is merely sort of nominal, rather than substantive or rich. And at no time, and again, this isn't criticism. This is, I think, an important observation. Did you say, "Well, I reject them because I find them simply false," or something like that? That wasn't the issue for you. This is something I keep trying to express to people about the meaning crisis. That most people's rejection of the legacy religions isn't some sort of, like you said, new atheist scalpel. Well, look, I can cut it apart and it falls to pieces under my, on the deft use of the invocation of this logical fallacy or that. You didn't say that, and I thought that was important. And that goes back to your that original juicy statement. You're not inspired by what's offered on the table of religion because it doesn't have the vibrancy, it doesn't have that life, and it doesn't have that deep rootedness, and it doesn't have the imaginal, like Corbin says, integrating those two together in a profound way. And I think, well, I want to thank you. I mean, you're helping to articulate the phenomenological structure, the depth, and the intricacies of the meaning crisis, right? It's exactly that sense, right? That no, but I want something that enhances vibrancy and life, and yet is rooted deep in my own tradition. And yet, when I turn to the legacy religions, they're not doing that. And I can't just import a religion from elsewhere. It won't, the transplant is very liable to fail. And so you're bereft and you're hungry. And I just picked that up from you so powerfully. And I wanted to thank you for that.
That's right, man. Yeah. Well mirrored. That's true. It's not too much to ask, is it? A vibrant, rooted sense of religious practice or whatever it would be.
Yeah, the ratio religio, that really rightly proportioned and dimensioned and shaped connectedness to ourself and to each other and to the world. And so is the job I'll use a religious term here, and I want to use it in the biblical sense, not in the modern sense. Is the job of fantasy literature prophetic? Again, not in the sense of foretelling the future, but trying to wake people up and become aware again of pertinent patterns and pressing issues that they're otherwise blind to. I mean, that was the job of the biblical prophets. Do you think that fantasy literature has the role of prophecy to try to wake us back up so that we can find that religiosity? Go ahead.
People are so familiar with the word prophecy to mean predicting the future that, like you said, you don't mean that. You don't. So we have to say it again because it's so. I mean, when you said it, that's what I thought. And I've heard you say this before in other videos. So it's not that. It's waking up. It's waking up to what's already there. Like a good way to imagine it for me is if you take anything, piece of furniture, bookshelf, steaming cup of tea, or the dying ash tree outside your house, and you sit with it for a minute, and you can imagine you can imagine a worm perceiving that same ash tree or steaming cup of tea, or an anaconda or a badger or whatever, an amoeba, and each perception is completely different because the structure of their bodies, their autopoiesis, their sensory perception that binds them to the encompassing ecosystem is very different to yours. And so you all have a unique, different, the way the mystery of the ash tree or the steaming cup of tea really is presencing itself differently depending on the structure of that organism's sensory perception, its body and its body's relationship with the surrounding body, the world, right? And so right straight away that starts to liquefy my imagination in an amazing way, because suddenly things can come alive. That the way that you're coupled to the world, to the steaming cup of tea, is very, very specific. It's almost like it has a kinship and a brotherhood about it. The stream that's moving between you and the drink, the teacup, the ashtray is unique. That's co-evolved over millions and millions of years. It's incredible. You've got that. That's a gift. And the crow's got hers, and the worm's got his. And that makes the world straight away come more alive for me. And I think the kind of fantasy that I'm interested in, and the field of fantasy literature, just fantasy literature, never mind all the movies and all the
Yeah.
other stuff, games, etc., that we've got. It's very, very broad, isn't it?
Yes, yes, yes.
And if you just look at fantasy magic systems, you can see that. Like one example is sometimes magic is used as a metaphor for domination and control, which is
Yes.
sort of the antithesis of what I'm interested in. I'm interested in magic as something numinous that can restore your sense of the flame of things in the world. So when you put the book down, you go outside, the world seems to glow more. You feel more at home in the world, or there's a sense of possibility that was not there before. You
Yes.
have more energy and ideas, and maybe the invisible threads and fairy streams that are linking your heart to the world, they're a bit more healthy. They're not as blocked up.
Yeah.
This is very hard to do, like a
Yes.
good fantasy book will do that, but they're extremely hard to create. Tolkien took an awful long time to make his.
Yes. It strikes me that you're invoking something similar, and Jordan and Hall and I talked about this, to the distinction within late antiquity, especially circling around the Neoplatonic world between Theurgia and sorcery. Sorcery is the magic of domination and trying to control, and Theurgia, the work of the gods, Theos or Ergon, right? Is that what you're trying to do is exactly that. You're trying to allow yourself to see everything animated by the gods. You're right. And so the point of the ritual was to do exactly what you said. I love that metaphor of these silken threads. I guess you got them from Abrams, but that unblocking them and the disclosure of them, and also allowing them to move and weave. I like that, what you were talking about when you're talking about the teacup, and I was getting the image of almost that weaving between you and the teacup and realizing it. And then you were also reminding me of Uxkol and his notion of the Umwelt, and how every creature lives in a different world because of the different ways in which their senses and their body give them access. And then I think about the stuff I've been doing with other people like Daniel Saruba and Christopher Mastipietro and Guy Senstock and Jordan Hall, about finding the through line through all of the different aspects within any perspective, and then between all of the perspectives. Because then I come back and I want to say, yeah, but what is the ash tree such that the worm can see it that way, and the hedgehog can see it potentially that way, and each one is fitted and discloses the depth in that fittedness, and such that I can see it this way, and for me, the imaginal can extend, therefore, our ability to find the profundity of that through line, and as the more rich the variation that is bound to it, the more we appreciate its capacity to bind all of those different aspects and all of those different perspectives together. And for me, rituals, the rituals that do that are theurgic. They like you say, they're waking. The job is not to help give us any kind of dominance. In fact, it's the reverse. Their job is to so awaken us to this connectedness that we seek to more and more conform ourselves to the depth of that reality. It's not how can I make everything shape to me. It's how can I be better shaped unto this sacred depths of things. What does that land for you? Is what I'm proposing?
Yeah, it totally lands, and it makes me think of something you said to Damien. You were playfully asking the question. I've got it written down here somewhere. This is what you said. You said, "Is there that much of a difference between internalizing Socrates and internalizing Gandalf?" Which I thought was really funny and interesting, and obviously Socrates has certain rich, infinitely deep
Yeah.
living tradition surrounding him, but perhaps so does Gandalf.
Yes.
One of the sources of Gandalf was that guy from the Kalevala, that kind of what is he called? I can't remember his name. Begins with V. Damn it! What is his name? Perhaps we'll come back to it. But the guy from the Finnish mythology, the Kalevala, Väinämöinen, I think he's called, something like that.
Yeah.
He's one of the sources of the Finnish Kalevala. I mean, that is a rich mythology.
Right.
But Tolkien, you know, Gandalf declares himself to be, or reveals that he's a servant of the secret fire.
Yes.
And in Tolkien's language, that has to do with the Holy Spirit,
Yes.
which obviously has roots in Plato and
Yes.
Plato in Socrates. It's related to pneuma, right? And
Yes.
world soul, and this
Yeah.
sense of imaginal air and element fire kind of combined.
Yes.
Uh, it's an intermixing of the actual physical, in my imagination, this rich life sustaining substance that we call air or wind moving.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
animate, invisible, keeps us
Yeah.
alive, carries all our voice and ideas, and fire, Prometheus, fire of the gods, all the things to do with fire. Gaston Bachelard's psychoanalysis of fire,
Fire. Yes. Yeah.
all of this stuff. So somehow that's being intermixed in this idea of pneuma in Plato, obviously drawing on Socrates,
Yeah.
and in the Holy Spirit inspires Tolkien's work, and Väinämöinen from the Kalevala inspires, amongst other things, Tolkien's Gandalf. And
Yeah.
so that's like Tom Cheetham does this amazing thing with I think
Yes.
he's got an essay called "The Flame of Things," which I've stolen. It's such a beautiful phrase. I don't know if he robbed it off someone, but he's probably drawing on Corbin a lot and Hillman.
Yeah.
And it's that what is the flame of things?
Yes.
It's what you were saying there, but you were wondering, like, what really is the ash tree, or that
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
steaming cup of tea? What's its true nature, true reality, and or the plurality of its realities? This just invites you right into the heart of mystery and awe. And I love this phrase that you use of reverence being the virtue of awe. So I
Yes.
see fantasy, that is its main job for me anyway.
Ah. Ah. To cultivate the virtue of reverence.
It's
That's a
that, yeah.
beautiful statement. It's a beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. There. J.P. Marceau. I can't remember. He cites one of the physicists who asked the question, "What breathes fire into all of the equations?" So they go from being these eternally unmoving, structures of intelligibility to being the vibrant and alive that we find. But I like, and yeah, and yeah, and what's needed there exactly is the education of the virtue of reverence. So I want to ask you the same kind of question I asked. I think I asked Thomas Cheetham when I was talking to him. I know I asked Damien when I was talking to him. You can see from my enthusiastic engagement that so much of this connects with what I'm talking about. But what about one of my sort of standard criticisms of the Romantics per se, which is they didn't give us a proper account of how to deal with self-deception and irrationality, not in the scalpel sense, but in the Platonic sense, and the silliness and the self-indulgence and the narcissism of so much of the New Age movement and things like that. You know what I'm talking about. There's a whole constellation of ways in which what we're talking about can go radically wrong. And you can get spiritual bypassing, and you can get the noxious kind of escape where people aren't escaping from the prison, they're escaping from their responsibilities. And they're escaping from their moral obligations, and they're escaping from their own existential commitments to their aspirational better self. All of this kind of stuff. The Peter Pan person who never grows up and faces the requirements of responding and taking responsibility for their lives and the way their lives impact on other people's lives, but it's endlessly spinning off, right? And I can tell that that's also something that because you're nodding as I'm mentioning it, you've put some thought into. And one of my criticisms of people like Coleridge and Wordsworth and others is yes, they were criticizing the Enlightenment's idolatry of a certain computational sense of reason, but they didn't give us much about how to deal with our endless proclivities for self-deception and self-centeredness and spiritual materialism and obscurantism and silliness of thought as opposed to seriousness of thought. That whole realm of ways in which stepping outside of the buffered self can also expose us to that kind of whirlwind of foolishness. What would you say to that as a challenge or a question?
Sure. Well, I agree with what you're saying about romanticism and the question of what's romanticism come of age or a
Yeah,
post-tragic romanticism.
yeah,
That's an interesting question. But I'm not sure if a close reading of those guys, I mean, that Wordsworth and Coleridge are sophisticated philosophers of
yes,
imagination
yeah,
and very um, precise and deep phenomenologists
yes,
as well. So I'm not sure if a close reading of them wouldn't contradict what you're saying a little bit. Maybe Ian McGilchrist could tell us because I think he reads them all the time. But
yeah.
uh, um,
Fair
I just
enough.
wanted
Keep
to
going. Keep
come
going.
back at that a little bit.
Yeah,
There's probably some hidden gems in there. But anyway, point is, you're totally right. There's a kind of enchantment with romanticism and with the numinous and with fantasy, and it goes right back into the idea or the land or the creatures of fairy.
yeah,
Those can hypnotize you
yes,
and enchant you and lead you astray. It's all kinds of stories about that, very old stories, in many, many different cultures where people are led astray and hypnotized and
yes,
sometimes don't return at all
yes,
to the human world. Or if they do, they're just completely dazzled and they can't see what's in front of them. They might let their own son or daughter die.
mm,
Um, I'm a father now. I have a boy who's nearly 4 years old and a daughter who's like 7 months. So
wow,
this is a huge thing for me,
yeah,
because part of it is my wife is a musician and she has a creative life. Um, but being a mother, she loves motherhood. But keeping the spark alive, just
uh-huh,
the whole ridiculous challenge of how can I write good work, good stories, which is monumentally difficult, just to write good stories,
yeah,
be a good father, uh, um, pay the bills,
yeah,
also difficult sometimes, and and not gobble up all the free time and make sure my wife has time to pursue her
yes,
creative calling. These are all things that enrich this idea of romanticism come of age.
mm,
The Peter Pan character or the naive, blinkered romantic would ignore all these things, you
mm-hmm,
know, not be married, not try and uh engage with these difficult questions or sacrifice. Like in that Rilke poem, there's one a man stands up during dinner and just leaves and goes off to find the church that's forgotten, the sacred
yeah,
place in his life and culture. And another man does not do that, stays and dies a different kind of death in the dishes. And so if you go off on the creative quest, the calling only, then for me, if I do that, I failed the mission, that my deepest quest. And if I ignore the quest, the calling, and just do the dishes and be, a sort of a passive domestic house husband, I've definitely failed as well.
yeah,
I need to integrate them in some interesting way whilst contending with all this trouble, this grief. Like, Zach Stein's book, Education in a Time Between Worlds. We've
yes,
never been in this situation before.
yeah,
What's an appropriate set of
yes,
actions and ecologies of practice, as you like
yeah,
to say?
yes.
How do you be a good father? These are very interesting questions that I don't have answers to, and I want to put into the work and try and live.
That was an excellent answer. Um, yeah, I was talking to Paul Manafort the other day, and I was said, about a disturbing. I find it disturbing motif around sages. Siddhartha leaves his wife and kid to go into on the quest, and Jesus talks about rejecting your father and your mother, and and letting the dead bury their dead, and And of course, within the Jewish tradition, we have Abraham being willing to sacrifice Isaac up to the calling from God, and Kierkegaard wrestling with that. And of course, your point is right. Kierkegaard doesn't give any simple answer. There's a tremendous amount of reflection, and that motif is. I think there's. Sorry. I want to be very clear. I'm happy that the mythos, and I don't mean myth in the pejorative sense, but the mythos around the sages, gives us that motif, because I think it's something we're meant to wrestle with. That, and I think you put it really well, and D.C. Schindler puts it really well in his discussion of Plato's Critique of Impure Reason in the Republic, and Drew Hyland in Plato's notion of finite transcendence. All of these are ways of saying we have to somehow integrate this two together. The absolute has to also include the relative. The transcendent doesn't ever liberate us from our finitude, right? We don't give in to just our finitude, because then we become servile and we despair. But if we just pursue transcendence, then we become Icarus and we inflate. For every heroic myth, there's a myth of hubris to counterbalance, right? And I've been trying to understand, like you, what does it mean to really try to live that tonos, that living polarity? I think of it almost like the poles of a magnet generating a magnetic field, that we're always caught. We're always metaxu. We're always in between. That's how Socrates described himself, and how he described the eros as the daemon that drove him. It was always between, always between. I'm coming to think that that's the thing that needs to be emphasized in the current, I don't know, advent of spirituality in this kairos, the between, the transjective. This is why, because that is the proper place now, where we should be putting the emphasis on how we see ourselves as, well, I'll quote the police, as spirits in the material world. How to, like, and I know this is vague, so because I'm entrusting myself to you to find what I'm trying to say in here. But is this landing with you as I'm trying to get at that this is right? This is actually the place, the locus, where we should be trying to situate so as to awaken our spirituality. Does that land at all for you, or?
Yeah, the idea of the betwixt and between, the
Yeah,
borderlands, and
yeah,
the liminal edge, and sort of an uncomfortable place to be, and that's
yes,
probably a good thing.
yeah,
The idea that this in-betweenness has intrinsic value, and
yes,
it's its own thing.
yes.
It's got its own internal sovereignty, even though it's not one or the other. It's in between.
He-
Um,
he-
Jung's got his whole thing on the tension of opposites.
yes, yes, which he gets from Nicholas of Cusa, who's the
Right,
culmination
right.
of the Neoplatonic contemplative tradition in the West. Yeah, because I think that's I mean, I don't think that's the life of the gods, or is it the life of the earth? But that's the form of spirituality that will perpetually preserve while enriching our humanity. It never tries to get us to escape from our humanity, but it always demands that we enrich the depths of our humanity.
Well said. Yes. And so trying to do this whilst doing the dishes and paying the bills
Yeah, yeah,
and doing the creative work, that's an enormous challenge. And one thing I keep coming back to is any small business or artist of any kind, probably anyone trying to do anything, is kind of forced to engage with social media.
yes,
And this is a problem.
yeah, yeah,
The accurate and precise scientific way to understand what social media is as an enormously powerful monster or
yes,
demon of the underworld,
yes,
AI-backed social media.
yeah.
And if you think you've got the strength to resist it, then good luck to you. So I'm a writer, and I have to do social media if I want to make even a small portion of
Yeah,
my living
I understand what you're
from it.
talking about completely.
Yeah, so I'm like, how the hell do I do it without? Because that's the other thing, to use McGilchrist language, you got the quality of attention of the right hemisphere, which is like, it's like the wise sage
Yeah.
is um, deep, sustained, and broad quality of attention, whereas as the left, the high functioning bureaucrat is more precise,
Yes.
focused, better to deal with manipulation, control, and bureaucracy, and actually probably posting social media
Yeah.
videos and things like this, and the goddamn platforms, they want you to do it every day or every week, and I don't want to do that because it takes me out of that quality of attention that I'm giving to the
Yes.
work.
Yes.
So then you have to do up these things like stack up a big load of posts or videos and schedule release them and come up with these tactics and try and do it an
Yeah.
intelligent way that it doesn't use too much time, in a way that doesn't feel like it's going to give you burnout, that sustains you. How to do that is a huge, like, people are so disenfranchised and pissed off with it, this sort of attention economy, and like how insidious it is, getting into people asking their friends to, oh, can you share this, can you like this,
Yes.
like the market forces intermixing with deep friendships.
Yeah.
That's some dangerous stuff.
Yeah. And all the parasocial relationships that are forming. I'm trying. And I mean trying, essay, right? Essay. I'm trying very hard to play with this medium and innovate in it in order to try and, I don't know, well, I'll use Plato. I want to tame the monster. I want to find the lion by which I can tame the monster, so that um, uh, there's a proper disposition of its power back towards the good, at least in this little corner of the internet, as Sevilla King has named it. Because I take very I feel the responsibility to the challenge you've posed, and not just to talk about it, but to try to do what I can in terms of manner and format and content and project, to thwart the AI demons, and disclose possibilities, perhaps even being exemplified right now, of this medium for um, affording people's aspiration to the good. That is what I'm trying to. As you know, I keep trying all different things. The next series after Socrates, I'm playing with the format. Part of it's lecture, part of it's points for discussion. Everyone also has a practicum. Here's an actual practice. I'll teach you how to do it. In the middle of the monological series, I have a dialogical series with Christopher Mastapietro on Socrates and Kierkegaard. Then I also have a couple episodes where there's four of us from these emerging communities, and I'm trying to mix and match and play and cross boundaries with the medium as much as I can to try and disclose. Well, I'm trying to interact with the medium imaginally so that I can perceive real possibilities within it and disclose it to those people who want to connect to each other in a vibrant and vital manner, like you've been talking about. And I don't know if I'm succeeding or failing. All I can say is I'm giving it all of my innovative best,
Yeah,
trying,
yeah,
yeah,
I see
trying to
that.
do.
I see that. I really appreciate what you're doing, and it's inspiring. And the way that you're engaging with actual communities as
Yes.
well. You're not a sequestered academic.
No,
You
no,
are
no. Did my
on the
Thunderbolt
ground
summer. I did. I
doing
was,
things. Yeah,
and I'm doing
it's
another
great.
one. I'm going to go. I'm going to partake in Iris Stenberger's wisdom project. I'm actually going to go through the courses with her. I'm going to do in the new year. I'm going to do Steve March's Aletheia coaching. Yeah, I'm participating in as much of these communities, interacting with them. I did Return to the Source with Rafe Kelly, which was talk about being on the horizon of horror, but also thereby opened up to the depths of the numinous. That did that for me in a profound way. And I cannot recommend more strongly what he has to offer in his Return to the Source. Yeah, yeah, you're right. Wow, someone who talks about perspectival and participatory knowing can't sit on the outside and only point at things with propositions. Yeah, you have to go in, you have to undertake, you have to undergo, you have to do what the anthropologist does. You have to go and get those lenses ripped off your face, and so that when you put them back on, you see them anew. Yeah, very much, very much. I'm trying. I aspire to do that, which with as much integrity and honesty as I possibly can.
Yeah, it reminds me of Hayao Miyazaki, the Japanese animator. I mean, he's a fantasist, really.
Yeah,
Princess Mononoke,
yeah,
Spirited Away,
yeah,
My Neighbor Totoro. These are indelible experiences for a whole lot of people, that restore the flame of things a little bit when they walk around the world. And he's a great advocate and protector of the forests.
yeah,
I think he does work to guard Japan's old forests,
yes,
and so that is political engaged action from a fantasist, from an animator,
yes,
from an animistic animator, and there are other people like that. This is a great clue for people who write fantasy, I think, to be politically engaged in a way that makes sense, that echoes the spirit of their work. I do similar things. I started a community interest company called Living Woods Northeast about 7 years ago to try and bring back some of the old woodland to the northeast of England, because there's not a whole lot of it here. Just the the vision of being able to journey
uh,
through an old forest for several days and you can't find the end of it, and you're meeting people along the way, and there are
yeah.
all kinds of animals that exist in it. This is a 400-year vision. Um, but you can get glimpses of this, like Yakushima Island in Japan, that inspired
Or
Princess Mononoke. That is such a place.
go
Um,
come to Algonquin Park in Ontario,
right.
Canada, and you'll get that. You'll get
Yes,
that.
you've got it in Canada. Yeah. We don't have it so much here now in
Yeah,
the British Isles. It's really sad.
it is. Well, Ben, I want to bring this to a close, but I always like to give my guests the last word. It doesn't have to be summative or cumulative. It can just be inspirational, or it could be something provocative. But I always like to give the what's the final thing you want to leave the viewers with before we end it today?
Well, it's just to sort of playfully challenge you, John, on this
Okay.
idea that you were asking about. What does fantasy do? It's good if it creates wisdom. Wisdom is the best thing, and wisdom has to do with avoiding self-deception
Yes.
and encouraging meaning
Yes.
in people's lives. This makes me think of our approach to dreams,
Mm,
and dreams get translated into this. This is Hillman's whole idea of they get translated straight away into concepts. So
yes.
you're given this sometimes gift by whatever the anima mundi is, of a dream, that an encounter with a figure, a person or an animal or a presence, and you wake up, you feel changed, you feel different. You have a sense that that was a troubling dream, and that trouble might be good, or you have a sense that that was a good
Yeah.
dream, and you just inexplicably feel great for that day. Um, we translate the dream into meaning. And Hillman asks, well, maybe it's not a meaning service or an information service. Maybe it's an imagination service, and
Yes.
that the image itself has intrinsic value. I know you've got a whole lot to say on this. Well, I think we're going to do another one of these. So this could be
Yes.
an interesting place for us to jump off.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. Um, and I'm doing a lot on like especially the work I'm doing more recently on ritual, the non-reducibility of ritual, even to myth, let alone to philosophy or theology. And trying to get out what are the relationships between these things that are interwoven but not reducible or replaceable by each other. And exactly. Um, let's definitely talk about that. I think that's an excellent provocation to end on. I look forward to talking to you again, Ben. And if
You
you'd
too,
like,
John.
I can come on your channel if that would be something that you think would be of value to your work.
For sure, man. I love talking to you.
Yeah, I love talking to you too. Thank you so much.
Right on. Have a great day.
Too.